Right, it's 12 o'clock. I think we're ready to start. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's Global Week at the moment, this week in the university. And part of the celebrations, I was asked to do something for that. So I am going to do this lecture, which is on the golden age of Islamic inventions. Later on, I'm actually doing a cultural dressing up stall as well later on in the lobby downstairs on Friday. So what is the golden age of Islam? It's actually a period of time in history when Muslims flourished in lands and invented many, many inventions which benefited the whole world. And does anybody know why the golden age of Islam may have come about? What is there in the Islamic religion which made that come about? Made people start looking into things and reading, for example. Any ideas? What is the very first word of the Quran that was revealed? Read, good. So, the very first word of the Quran that was revealed was read, Iqra. And the various Quranic injunctions and all the hadiths, the sayings of the Prophet, they all went for placing value on education and emphasizing the importance of acquiring knowledge. And that played a huge role in influencing Muslims to search for knowledge. And there is one more very important saying: the seeking of knowledge is obligatory for every Muslim, and that's for male and females. And it actually encourages you to seek knowledge. And because of that, when Islam came, people started seeking knowledge. Even though the Prophet was completely illiterate, he actually tried to influence everybody to be educated. So everybody started reading, becoming educated, looking into books. And it's from there that the golden age of Islam then ended up resulting. So here we are. Here is a map. And this is the map showing the expansion of the Muslim Empire. Muawiyah was the first caliph of the Umayyad dynasty, and during the rule of the Umayyads, the empire grew to its greatest size, stretching across North Africa and the Middle East to Pakistan and in Europe, and most of the Iberian Peninsula, that's Spain and Portugal. So this map shows the growth of the Islamic Empire from the death of Prophet Muhammad to its largest size. And as you can see, the red areas are when Prophet Muhammad died. Those were the regions where Islam was. And then we go on to the orange areas. That was the next expansion of the Islamic Empire, which was mainly in the Arabic region, and it was all Arabia in those days, but those names are according to modern names. And then if you look at the yellow parts, that is the largest size the Islamic Empire got to, and it was there then that the golden age of Islam actually took place in that era. And that was actually in 750 onwards. So the most important thing in Islam is obviously the Quran, which we believe is the word of God. It's the holy book of Muslims. So people tried to write it really, really beautifully. And if you look at the way the Quran is written, all the letters are beautifully curved and round. A lot of curvy type letters going on there. So what do you think might have been invented as a result of the writing in the Quran, having to write the Quran? Anybody? Calligraphy. And how do you write the calligraphy? With a pen. Okay, brilliant answer. So calligraphy pen was invented as a direct consequence of being able to write the Quran. So the fountain pen in 953 AD, the Sultan of Egypt demanded a writing tool which would not leak ink or stain his clothes. The fountain pen was devised. The pen had a reservoir which held the ink, and gravity and capillary action moved the ink to the writing tip, enabling it to write. Now, the problem then next was that the Quran is exactly the same no matter which copy you pick up. So everybody, can you imagine how much time there must have been in there to write each and every letter of the Quran, and how long it would take to finish the whole Quran in writing it? So what do you think Muslims might have now adapted in order to get quick lots of Qurans? Printing. Excellent, well done. The printing press was invented by Muslims. In 1454, Gutenberg developed the most sophisticated printing press of the Middle Ages. However, movable brass types were in use in Islamic Spain 100 years prior. That's where the world's first printing devices were made. And that was in 1354. And that picture there is of a very, very old printing press, and that's taken from the Science Museum. You can... It takes a bit of time, I suppose, in spreading the knowledge. But the other thing I forgot to say at the beginning is we're going to have questions at the end. Okay? So if you can hold on to your questions, and we will answer them at the end. Okay. Did you know that because of this thing about reading and seeking knowledge, it was actually this princess, Fatima al-Fihriya, under the Khalifa, that built the very first university during 841 CE in Morocco. And she taught science along with other various subjects in that university. So Muslims were the first to establish universities. Did you know that the concept of the position of the chair of a university comes from where the university lecturer would sit on a large chair with students sitting all around him? So that's very interesting for a university setting. So the chair of a committee, the chair of a mosque, the chair of a university, that's where it comes from. And that university is still around. Here it is. This is a real-life picture of that university, and I've seen it when I went to Morocco on holiday. It's the world's oldest university. It is called the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, and it's in Fez in Morocco, and it's still there today. It is, yes. And then this is the turning point in history, actually. Baghdad was built by Caliph al-Mansur, and it was the new capital of the Islamic Empire. And that is where this place opened, the House of Wisdom, called the Bayt al-Hikmah in Arabic, founded by Khalif Harun al-Rashid. It was a library and research facility which collected and translated scientific writing from many languages. And by 860 AD, it held the largest collection of books in the world. So liaison with the traders inspired the Christians then to learn about the House of Wisdom. We did speak a little bit about this last time when we did the history of Islam in Britain. And Muslim scholarship, especially early Islamic philosophy and Islamic science, was well known through Latin translation among the learned in England, which led to the founding of Arabic chairs at Oxford and Cambridge universities as well, where Arabic was taught. A large collection of Arabic manuscripts were acquired, collected in places such as the Bodleian Library at Oxford, and these Arabic manuscripts were sought after by natural philosophers for their research in subjects from science, religion, medicine, typography, and plants. And Roger Bacon, actually, who we will talk a little bit later on, is actually one of the most famous Englishmen who studied some of these books in Oxford University, and he actually did quote some Muslim people in his books as well. So how did the spread of Islam affect the world? People migrated from all over the world to study in the Muslim universities. And as millions of people embraced Islam, they brought with them the heritage of ancient civilizations like Egypt, Greece, India, Persia, and Rome. And universities and libraries, you'll be interested in this because you work in a library. Library was actually invented by Muslims as well. And there were so many libraries being opened everywhere all of a sudden. This is a real-life painting of some scholars at an Abbasid library from the Maqamat of Al-Hariri, Baghdad. And the person who painted it is there as well, Yahya al-Wasiti, in 1237. So the first libraries were established in the universities, and because universities were formed, what else now needs to be formed under the universities? Schools, yes, because universities are right at the top. What about the education leading up to the universities? So it was actually Muslims who opened the first schools as well. And as the number of universities increased, knowledge spread, and this is how many, many inventions then took place. Islamic scholars built upon ancient heritage with their own scientific advances, and Muslims excelled in art, architecture, astronomy, maths, geography, science, and history. Now, there were actually two types of inventions that were invented. The first type of inventions that were invented were as a direct result of the religion. So there were certain things in the religion that made Muslims invent items. We will look at those first. And then some things were invented because of the science in the Quran. There was so much science and knowledge in the Quran, and when people looked into it, they investigated further into what things God had revealed. So let's deal with the religion first. Now, the second pillar of Islam, right after believing in God, is, does anybody know? What's the second pillar of Islam? Prayer. Prayer is the second pillar of Islam. So when it was revealed that Muslims need to pray 5 times a day, what do you think might have been one of the very first inventions? Somebody said time, clocks. Clocks. Very important, because we needed to know when the time was to pray. So did you know that, first of all, the pendulum was discovered by Ibn Yunus al-Masri during the 10th century, who was the first to study and document its oscillatory motion. Its use in clocks was introduced by Muslim physicists during the 15th century. So here is somebody called Al-Jazari. He was a 13th century engineer, ingenious inventor. He created a massive elephant clock and invented ground-making machines, changing the way we harness technology today. So in those days, people couldn't have clocks in each single room. They could not afford it. So what they did was they made a big elephant clock, massive one, and they would put that in the middle of a big city or town so that everybody could see the time. A little bit like Big Ben, isn't it? A little bit like Big Ben. So there is the elephant clock, and that's an actual painting, actually, of the elephant clock. When it was revealed to pray 5 times a day, that is what happened. An instrument had to be made in order to find out when the exact times of prayers were. So from all of that, remember that Al-Jazari had to make cogs and all the internal mechanism. That then led to mechanical engineering. So in 1206, he actually published a book called Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, and in it, he described over 50 inventions. Here are some of them. A combination lock, mechanical clocks powered by water and weights, valves and pistons, crankshaft, key mechanism in nearly all inventions, which turns rotary motion into linear and can be used for internal combustion engines and to raise water to irrigate crops. Remember, there was no water in Islamic countries. So there was a big shortage of water, and water was very scarce, so they needed machinery in order to try and extract water out of the ground as well. All of those inventions are actually in this book, which is a brilliant book, 1001 Inventions, Muslim Heritage in Our World. And if you want a baby version of it, because that's too big for you, it's too fat, this is a junior version, and it does document quite a lot of the inventions in there. But a lot of them, if you go to the Science Museum, there's a huge display on the Islamic exhibition there, and all of these are actually from there. Okay, so the mechanics of a clock. Knowledge then transmitted to Europe through Latin translations of Islamic books on mechanics. These clocks were weight-driven. Designs and illustrations of epicyclic and segmental gears were provided. One such clock included a mercury escapement. This was directly copied by Europeans during the 15th century. During the 9th century, Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain, according to Will Durant, invented a watch-like device which kept accurate time. So watches obviously then came. It started off really big, and then it ended up smaller clocks in your houses and then watches. In the 9th century, Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain, according to Will Durant, invented a watch-like device which kept accurate time. Muslims also constructed a variety of highly accurate astronomical clocks for use in their observatories as well. Right, so it's time for prayer. You've looked at the clock. Yes? What's next? You know it's time to pray. What do you do next? Yes, washing. Okay, washing. So, did you know that the very first fountains were invented by Muslims, which were usually kept outside a mosque in hot countries? So before you go in, you could wash yourself in these great big areas, reservoirs, or wells as well. Washing was very important. Water fascinated Muslims as it was rare, and what they would do is they would decorate it. So they would use water and do decorating to make it like a little centerpiece in their palaces. And they already had the engineering, like I explained in the previous slide, to extract the water out of the ground and make this. So this is how fountains ended up happening. And because they were extracting water out of the ground, hydropower as well was then invented. And this then later on became electricity, much later on. And remember that conservation of water was very important, so they invented dams to try and collect all the water in one place because there wasn't any there. Okay, so you're going now to wash yourselves. What's the first thing that you do? Brush your teeth. Okay, so here it is. Did you know that the very first toothbrush, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he chewed the bark of a special tree called miswak, and he used that as a toothbrush. And it's really, really interesting because in that special bark there is vitamin C, which stops bacteria growing in your mouth. There's also so many other things. Cytosterol strengthens the capillaries that nourish the gums. It contains a resinous substance that strengthens the gums. It also contains chloride and silica, which is known to increase the whiteness of teeth as well. So this is a very, very important invention because it was the ingredients from that bark then that led to toothpaste. Okay, so toothpaste was actually made from that bark. Okay, what else will you need after that? You've brushed your teeth, you're going to wash for the rest of you. What is there that you might use? Soap. Well done. Brilliant answers from some of you. Excellent. Okay, soap. So ancient Egyptians, you're all doing well actually, you're all doing well. Ancient Egyptians and Romans had a form of pomade from which Muslim Arabs perfected a recipe for soap, creating a vegetable oil and sodium hydroxide base to which fragrant thyme oil was added. And did you know that the word alkali, because obviously sodium hydroxide is alkali base, was added, and that word was actually al-gali in Arabic, al-gali, which then became alkali. So the word alkali is actually an Arabic word. Yes, surprised? And did you know that, we did this last time actually, but I thought I'd put it in again. It was actually a Muslim person called Deen Muhammad who brought the soap and shampoo and that kind of stuff to Britain, and he opened up the very first baths in 1810. Indian vapor baths at the beach in Brighton. And that reference is from the Travels of Deen Mahomet and Shampoo, page 167. And that is a real-life picture of the baths that he opened in Brighton, a real-life painting. And did you know that washing powder and shampoo and all the other cleaning fluids then came from this idea of adding hydroxide to the soap? No, it's not anymore. No, but that is an old picture and it's taken from Brighton Pavilion Museum, yes? And not anymore. Sadly, he passed away and his offspring didn't want to take over his business, which is the sad case with a lot of people, isn't it? So, okay, so what's next? What do you hear now? So you're about to go in the mosque. the call to prayer. Now remember that there was no electricity in the days when Islam came, so a certain mechanism had to come about where the call to prayer would echo around the whole mosque. So this is where a dome and a minaret was invented. And a dome is round-shaped so that the echo of the call to prayer goes around the whole mosque. The Islamic world's dome and castle building techniques were introduced to European buildings, including parapets, round towers, battlements, and arrow slits. And did you know that Henry V enlisted a Muslim to build his castle? Because he wanted all those bits in there. So now you go in the mosque and you see pillars. And did you know that it was Muslims who actually changed the previous pillar style to pointed arches? So the arches were round before. So Roman and Norman buildings used round arches. These were adapted with pointed arches used in the Islamic world and were able to bear more weight and hence stronger. These can be seen in Gothic cathedrals across Europe. Other Islamic architectural methods, including the rose window and ribbed vaulting, was introduced as well. So you're in the mosque now. What else can you see apart from pillars and the dome? Yeah, we'll come to that in a minute. Something else. Windows? Yes? Windows. The other thing, first of all, before we do the windows, is in Islam, we don't usually put pictures up of any people, prophets, or gods, because Islam came to get rid of idol worship. And we just strongly believe in the one God, so we avoid putting up pictures of any people or gods and things. The reason is just in case we might end up worshipping the wrong God, like what was happening before Islam came. So lots and lots of calligraphy was invented, and there are three different styles of patterns here. We've got geometric designs, vegetal, which is flowers, and calligraphy. I was talking to somebody about Alhambra Palace earlier on in Spain, and did you know that that palace uses all three techniques in there? Absolutely beautiful. Is it in Cordoba? Yes. Yes. It was all Muslim Spain. Andalusia is the area, yes. So it was during the Umayyad dynasty that an artistic style which could be clearly defined as Islamic began to develop. And here are some forms of Islamic art. And I have got some bits here with me. So we've got, even in our houses, normally we would have Arabic writing. This is the first pillar of Islam, and it's decorated with lots of flower designs. Calligraphy came, like I explained right at the beginning, we mentioned about the calligraphy pen, didn't we, being invented. So here's some calligraphy. And even on a Quran, you would never get any pictures of any people or idols and things. We've got beautiful calligraphy patterns in here as well. And you might have noticed in lots of Islamic designs, there's always blue stone involved in a lot of these mosques. I mean, there's the blue mosque as well in Turkey, isn't there? And that's because a lot of the blue stone does come from the Middle East. So, for example, turquoise is a very special stone, and that comes from the Middle East. The colours, yes. Were they all natural? Natural stones. All natural stones, yes. All natural stones. Absolutely beautiful, actually. You get the most colourful stuff in the hotter countries on the whole. Okay, and then we jumped to windows before, but it's windows now. Okay. Now remember, what is glass made out of? Who knows? What is glass made out of? Sand. And where do you get the most amount of sand? In the deserts of Arabia, yes? So glass was invented by Muslims. And you know all those lovely stones we're talking about? They extracted all the powders and things from those stones and then used dyes to dye the windows. And that's how we ended up with stained glass windows, with all the colourful compounds. Then we're ready to pray, and somebody already mentioned carpets, yes? Prayer mat to pray on. And carpets actually came from Turkey. Prayer mats were made to cover the sand before praying. So that was in Turkey, and I have got a prayer mat here, which you can have a look at over there. Again, all calligraphy and geometrical patterns you'll find on there. And those prayer mats then are then became carpets later on. It started off with individual prayer mats, and then later on the whole mosque would have a big carpet in it, and then it went into houses later. Started off in the places of worship, though. Okay, we're ready for our prayer mat. We've got our prayer mat. What's next? Muslims? Or anybody? Yeah, but before that, you've got your prayer mat. What do you have to do? Direction of prayer. And this is something very important because Muslims needed to find the direction of prayer. So what they did was, first of all, in the Quran, there were so many things mentioned about precise calculation, for example, of the sun and the moon. And also, it also told you about all the elliptical patterns of all the universe in there. It is not permitted for the sun to catch up with the moon, nor can the night outstrip the day. Each just swims along in its own orbit according to law. So that was all in the Quran. And it also said it is he who created night and day, the sun and the moon, each floating in its orbit. So what people started doing was they got fascinated in the world above them. And they started looking at the sky. And remember, this is the Middle East where there's no clouds, so they could see the stars clearly. And they got interested in looking at what was in the Quran up there. And from there, they ended up looking into the stars, and lots of Muslim astronomers came all of a sudden out. And they started inventing things. So Muslim astronomers made big improvements on Ptolemy's findings in the 9th century, disputing his archaic ideas. He had proof that the sun is at the center of the solar system. The Muslim astronomers knew that the sun was at the center of the solar system and the orbits of planets are elliptical because it was actually mentioned in the Quran. So they produced very accurate astronomical tables and star charts. And the Alphonsine tables were copies of works on astronomy transmitted to Europe via Islamic Spain. And we've got Toledo tables there. So it was in 1512 Nicholas Copernicus put forward his theory that the sun is stationary at the center of the solar system and the planets revolve around it. The belief that the sun's stationary was widespread, did you know, until the 20th century, when they found it was not stationary, yet Muslims knew this 1400 years ago. And it's because they knew about all these patterns that this very clever man, Al-Battani, he actually made the very first astrolabe. And he corrected Ptolemy's work, and he compiled new tables of the sun and moon. He was actually born in Turkey, but his actual works, his scientific works, was in Syria. And this is a very early picture of an astrolabe. It's found in the Science Museum. It was developed by Muslim astronomers, 8th century mathematician Muhammad al-Fazari, by introducing angular scales and adding circles indicating azimuths on the horizon. 10th century Abdul Rahman al-Sufi described 1,000 uses of astrolabes. They included astronomy, astrology, horoscopes, navigation, surveying, timekeeping, prayer times, and the direction of prayer. It was all in one little instrument. Very clever. And then it was introduced in Europe in 1100 and became most popular astronomical instrument by 1650. It was also an aid to navigation and a way of finding the direction of prayer. And when you look, first of all, the earlier prayer mats had astrolabes on there, but later on you will see that a compass ends up going on the prayer mat so that you know which way to face. But I haven't got the compasses yet. Compasses get a little bit later. And what's that made out of? Is it pure cotton? This? Or silk? Well, nowadays it's nylon. Turkish. The original ones were wool. Yes. The original ones were wool. Yes. And then did you know that later on, when satellite systems came about, only in the 1960s, it proved that all of the work that the Muslim astronomers did was all correct, and all the theories were found to be correct. Something else in the Quran, was, it said that the sun is a lamp and that shines on top of the moon to make it shine. So the moon was mentioned to be lit up by a reflection of the sun, and it was from the sun's light that a moon gets lit up, and everyone prior to this statement thought that the moon was also a light. So astronomers started looking at the phases of the moon by looking at the way the sun shines on the moon. And if you look at this very interesting picture, which is taken from the original book with Arabic writing on it, it's an eclipse of the moon when it passes into the Earth's shadow. It appeared in the works of the astronomer Al-Biruni. And this is the time when he was alive, 973 to 1048. So that was all because of the knowledge that was in the Quran. Right, what about the nighttime prayers? How are you going to stay awake in Ramadan? Any ideas? How can you stay up all night praying? What do you think might have been invented? Any ideas? Anyone? Pardon? No. Coffee. Okay. Okay. In the 9th century, there was someone called Khalid, and an Ethiopian shepherd noticed his goats had more energy after eating a special berry. He boiled them, resulting in coffee. This spread to Yemen, Turkey, Italy in 1645, and England in 1650. And did you know that the Arabic name Gawa is still used even today amongst our languages? And that became Kahve in Turkish, then cafe in Italian, and then coffee in English. So here is some more things. It was discovered in the 1400s in Yemen. Did you know that Mocha is a region in Yemen? Mocha coffee. And Java, some of the machines have Java written on there, is actually an island in Indonesia. It was seen as a bad drink in the 1500s due to its association with Islam. That was mainly because of the Crusades and things that were happening then. The first coffee house opened in Istanbul in 1554. Muslims used to stay awake during nighttime prayers. That's what it was used for originally, the coffee. And European coffee houses borrowed many Islamic ideas. So we've done prayer. The next pillar is charity, to do with money. And did you know that because of the need of Muslims, there were huge traders, even in Europe as well. They were going to so many different countries trading. They needed a way of transferring money from different countries, and also the need in Islam to write down any money owed with 2 witnesses. So the modern check comes from the Arabic word sak, a written vow to pay for goods when they were delivered to avoid money having to be transported across dangerous terrain. In the 9th century, a Muslim businessman could cash a check in China, drawn on his bank in Baghdad. And that is actually a picture of an original check. Okay. Now remember, in the Quran it said that the world was round, whereas previous to that everybody thought the world was flat. So based on that knowledge, people started exploring the world, and the very first map was made by somebody called Al-Idrisi. This is the very first map that showed that the world was round. Muslim geographers produced books on the geography of Africa, Asia, India, China, and the Indies during the 8th to the 15th century. These included the world's first geographical encyclopedias, almanacs, and road maps. Ibn Battullah's 14th century masterpieces provide detailed views of the geography of the ancient world. And Muslim geographers exceeded the output by Europeans regarding the geography of these regions well into the 18th century. With the maps, they needed navigation instruments, and that is when the compass was then invented at that time. So Muslim geographers and navigators were the first to use magnetic needles in navigation. They invented the compass. European navigators relied on Muslim pilots and their instruments when exploring unknown territories. The Chinese later on then improved their navigation after interacting with the Muslim traders in the 8th century. And did you know that all these sophisticated instruments then made future European voyages possible? And it was the future maps and instruments used by explorers later on. All of that was then used for all the discoveries later on. Right, moving on to a bit of science now. This man here, he invented this. What do you think that might be? It's not safe. Somebody said it here, camera. It's a camera. It's the first pinhole camera. Okay? And he was from Iraq. He was a mathematician, physicist, and astronomer. He was born in 965 AD. He was influential in the development of optics by observing how light enters through a hole. He realized a smaller hole yields a better picture. He invented the first camera in the 10th century. And did you know that the Arabic name he used was Qamra? Qamra means room, doesn't it, in our language, in some of our languages? And the word Qamra became camera. Okay, that's how you get the word camera. He proved light travels in straight lines, and we see because light reflects off objects into our eyes, whereas previously Greeks believed our eyes emit rays. So what else do you think he might have had a look at while he was looking at cameras and the way light goes in and then it turns upside down the picture? What else might he have been looking at the structure of, which is similar to cameras? Eyes. Good. Well done. Eyes. There you go. There's the eye. Okay, so he actually wrote books on the structure of the eye, and that was actually the first body part that was looked at in detail when we look at the medicine side of things. He determined everything that Newton advanced regarding optics centuries prior. He regarded as the founder of optics. He is regarded as the founder of optics. His works were utilized widely by European scholars, and he was the most quoted physicist of the 16th and 17th centuries. So there it is. That's a real manuscript of the first attempted description of the structure of the eye. And what else do you think might be now invented, now that you know the structure of the eye and the way the light goes in, and then things get bigger? There's your clue. Spectacles. Well done. Very, very good audience here. You're all really listening well. So there you go. There's the first pair of glasses with a lovely case with an Islamic design on it. Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain invented eyeglasses during the 9th century, and they were manufactured and sold throughout Spain for over 2 centuries. Roger Bacon, here we go again, the same person comes up, frequently actually referred to his work, to the research and work of Al-Haytham in his books in 1039. So very, very interesting. No, now they've got chains on them, haven't they? And yeah, I mean those ones, have you noticed they haven't got the side things there? So okay, so they're now looking into light, how it refracts, and this is the next invention. So what do you think that might be? Crystal? Yes? So here we go. Crystal was then invented, and it was first used for perfume bottles. And I have got 2 perfume bottles here. Here is one, which even now when you go to Islamic countries, you always see so many fancy perfume bottles. And here is another one. Do they still make them? They do. They do. These are actually, this one is from Morocco, this one's from Egypt. So and we will talk in a minute about perfumes. They've got the bottles and the perfume comes later, so we'll talk about that in a minute. And then from the glass, the crystals, so many other things were made. They've got the coffee, but they haven't got the coffee glasses and things. So whenever you go to Islamic countries, you will always see something like this, in which tea or coffee goes in, and then they take it out of there, and there's the fancy matching glass to go with it. Very, very beautiful. There is also a tea decanter. Okay. And this one, this is a little coffee glass, very strong coffee in there, and it's got Arabic writing on it as well. And again, coffee glass. So many different things that are brought in for you to have a look at, and you can still get these in Islamic countries. So, what else do you think was invented from glass? Anything else? What else was invented from glass? Mirrors. Who said that? Brilliant. You have not seen this before, have you? Mirrors. Used in Islamic Spain in the 11th century, the Venetians learnt of the art of fine glass production from Syrian artisans during the 9th and 10th centuries. And there is a very, very early mirror. There's not much you can see in there, but that was very early days. And then laboratory equipment. They've got the glass, so they're going to make all the laboratory equipment. And Muslim chemists Al-Harazi, Algebra, Al-Biruni, and Al-Kindi performed scientific experiments in chemistry 700 years prior to Boyle. Durant writes, Muslims introduced experimental methods to this science. Humboldt regards Muslims as the founders of chemistry. So test tubes and flasks. Now again, in the Quran, the whole evaporation cycle was talked about in detail. It even talked about the way the water rises with the heat, and then it makes clouds, and then when it cools down, it rains. All of that was mentioned in the Quran, and from that in mind, the Muslims started experimenting. Water was scarce anyway. They thought, wow, let's have a go and let's see, does that really happen? So they started boiling up water. And the concept of finite nature of matter was first introduced by Persia's Muslim scholar Al-Biruni, 1050 AD. He discovered that although matter may change its form, its mass remains the same. He used water first, heated to steam, and then later these principles were introduced to Europe in the 18th century. And I can go on to steam distillation, which was the next thing. Heat water first, and then they started experimenting with other things. What other items were rife in the Middle Eastern lands? Liquid that everybody needs for their cars. Petrol and oil. So then he started experimenting with oils and things. So Muslim chemists produced as well medicinal grade alcohol. So obviously we can't drink it, but we can use it for other things, can't we? So did you know that an alcohol was used as a solvent? And Muslim physicians and surgeons were applying purified alcohol to wounds as an antiseptic agent, and that was the very first plasters. Amazing. And then Muslim chemists then started playing around with kerosene as a distillate from petrol products, and that was all 1,000 years prior to Gessner, because obviously that's where all the petrol was, wasn't it? And obviously the separation of oil had a huge impact on all industries. And then also, this person here, Jabir ibn Hayyan, he pioneered basic processes, equipment and chemical experiments chemists use today. He was known for separating liquids by differences in boiling points, which is distillation, liquefaction, filtration, evaporation, purification, crystallization, and oxidization. This is bringing back memories of my science degree here. And he discovered sulfuric and nitric acid as well. And this is how perfumes came about. So there was a man called Jabir ibn Hayyan who was born in 722 AD, and Al-Kindi, and they were two of the most significant early Islamic chemists noted for their contribution in the development of perfume. And they created the alembic still used to create perfumes in rose water. Even now, when you go into some lands, you always get this, which is ether, which is pure perfume, very, very strong. If you pass it around, actually, you can see it is quite strong. You can get someone if you want to. So let's go on and do more science. This is an Arab Muslim great physician and surgeon, Al-Zahrawi. He is the father of modern surgery. He was known as Al-Bukassis in the West. Even now you can Google him and he'll be known as Al-Bukassis. He wrote a very big 30-volume book on medicine in the 900s, and it was used as the main medical textbook in Europe for centuries. He discovered how to treat diseases, how to prevent diseases by eating a healthy diet as well. The first operation he did was a cataract operation, because it was the eye structure that he knew of first, which was carried out in the first hospital, which I'll talk about later. Before that, leeches were used in the rest of the world to remove parts of the body. And Al-Harazi also performed the first caesarean and removal of kidney stones as well. Have you ever wondered why doctors are always Muslim? Because one, we've got this great big role model who is the father of doctors, who we try and copy. And we haven't got that many good role models at the moment, have we? Okay, and the second one is it's genetic. Something else that he did was he made over 200 different types of operation equipment. Okay? He refined science of surgery. He developed cauterization, which is the burning off of skin to stop infection. He discovered diseases can be hereditary. He invented over 200 surgical instruments, including scalpels, forceps, still used today in assisting childbirth, needles, precision scissors. He realized that catgut could be used as a capsule to allow medication to be ingested and used for stitching internal organs dissolving naturally. So the first capsules, you know we eat capsules and then they dissolve, don't they? And he developed the hollow needle technique to extract cataracts from the eye still used today. This is actually the original manuscript of Al-Tashrif, written by Al-Harazi, depicting surgical instruments used for operations used by Europeans as a reference guide for 500 years after it was finished in 1000 AD. Okay? So now, here's someone else, Zakaria, Muhammad ibn Zakaria. He worked out difference between smallpox and measles. He studied body fluids to distinguish between different diseases. He studied eye conditions, and he was the father of pediatrics. So he realized that children need to be treated differently to adults. And then obviously we've got all the medicines, we've got the doctors, we need pharmacies in which to put all the medicines. So the first chemists and pharmacies were opened by Muslims, and a lot of the herbal medicines that were in there all came actually from Prophet Muhammad, who refined all the things that Jesus taught us. Jesus taught us a lot of herbal medicine and healing and things. Obviously by that stage, by the time Islam came, everything had got a lot more refined, and then that was then used in the chemists and things like that. Pharmacopoeia was actually a very big industry, and did you know that the word drug actually is an Arabic word, drug, as well? So it was during the 14th century that there were many, many manuscripts on pharmacopoeia listing 1,400 different drugs, and hundreds of other pharmacopoeias were publishing all these journals. And this was prior to Harvard bringing the medicine into Europe. Vaccination. Children in Turkey were vaccinated with cowpox to prevent smallpox, establishing the technique of inoculation. Around 50 years later, in 1724, the wife of the English ambassador to Turkey introduced this practice to Europe. And even now, Turkey is very, very happy with... They feel really proud that they introduced this. And this is actually a Turkish stamp, and on it, it actually shows the inoculation procedure. The first hospital obviously had to be opened by Muslims because they had the doctors and all the medicines and the pharmacies are there. So did you know that the first hospital opened in Damascus in 707 by Caliph Abdul Malik, but the first public hospital was opened in Baghdad during the Abbasid Caliphate of Harun al-Rashid in the 8th century. Islamic hospitals maintained special wards for the insane, and for the first time, the mentally ill treated with supportive care, drugs, and psychotherapy. In England at that time, all the witches and sorcerers were all being burnt alive, so there was all kinds of things going on with the insane. They were burnt with the witches and things. Major Islamic cities maintained an insane asylum where patients were treated at no charge, and the Islamic system for treatment of the insane excelled in comparison to Europe. If you think about it, mental health is even just now really getting big, isn't it, out there? Whereas they were way ahead of their time. Right, I've got a video now which will summarise some of the science because there's just too much science, really. So we'll just put video on.
We live in a period of great change, of discovery and technological innovation. All areas of science are experiencing this progress, including healthcare and medicine, which have taken huge leaps forward in recent history. This quantum surge in medical knowledge and ingenuity is similar in importance to that which occurred in the Arab and Islamic world over 1,000 years ago. It was a storm of knowledge and enlightenment that still echoes in the halls of hospitals and clinics today. From the first accurate descriptions of the circulatory system to vaccination, surgery, and establishing the first real hospitals, our ancestors built the groundwork of modern medicine. The scientists of that age were often prominent in a number of subject areas. Abu Bakr Al-Harazi, known more popularly as Al-Harazi, was a shining example of this. He lived around the turn of the 9th and 10th century AD and made fundamental and lasting contributions to the field of medicine, chemistry, music, and philosophy, which is documented in over 200 books and articles, and made many discoveries in medicine through his own observations and experiments. Among his many medical achievements was to differentiate between smallpox and measles, which used to be confused before then, and identified fever as being the body's natural defense system and not a disease in itself. Possibly his most famous work is the extensive medical encyclopedia in 9 volumes called Al-Harazi. When it was translated into Latin more than 300 years after his death, it had a big influence on the course of medicine in Europe. Equal, if not of greater influence in Western Europe, was the comprehensive work of Ibn Sina, the Canon of Medicine, which was translated into Latin and used as a textbook in several universities until the middle of the 17th century. It is best known for its scientific approach to medicine, based on experimentation and quantification, describing known contagious diseases and sexually transmitted diseases, and introducing quarantine to limit the spread of infectious diseases, in addition to predicting the existence of microorganisms. In surgery, other physicians left their legacy, like Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, who identified 200 surgical instruments, many of which are still used today. He also introduced plaster for setting broken bones and catgut for stitching wounds, a practice still used today. Ammar ibn Ali al-Mawsili is also notable for inventing the injection syringe and hypodermic needle for the extraction of cataracts in the first successful cataract surgery. While Ibn Nafis was the first to accurately describe the blood-breathing and circulatory system in a manner comparable to modern medicine. And those were brilliant men of science that still shine bright in the stars of science galaxy.
So that's just a summary of some science there. I didn't even do half of really what, I could have done. Okay, other things, conservatories. Very hot to go out in hot countries. So then they made conservatories so they could look at their beautiful gardens from within. Also tents, Bedouin tents came obviously from Muslims. When it's very hot, you need fans, don't you? Okay, and windmills, first of all. Windmills were devised and constructed to draw up water from the streams to irrigate vegetation and to grind corn because they needed water and they needed to get it out of the ground. The first windmill was created in 634 AD for a Persian caliph, 500 years before the first ones were introduced in Europe. And this is an actual drawing from the books, a Persian horizontal windmill. And obviously fans then came from this same movement as well. This is the very first person, Ibn Firnas of Islamic Spain, who tried to fly. He was a poet, astronomer and engineer, first person to fly. He invented, constructed and tested a flying machine in 852 AD. He jumped from the minaret of the Grand Mosque in Cordoba, here it is Cordoba again, and walked away with minor injuries. And did you know then he tried again when he was 70 years old in 875 AD. He made a machine using silk and eagle's feathers, and he did manage to stay in the air for 10 minutes. He was honoured by having a crater on the moon and Baghdad airport named after him. And Roger Bacon, again, learnt of flying machines from Arabic references to Ibn Firnas's machine. The latter's invention antedates Bacon by 500 years and Da Vinci by 700 years. Okay, we know that lots of merchants were coming and going from different lands. Did you know that the motorways, the first motorways and roads, were made by Muslims because they're the ones who needed the routes to get into all the places? So the Silk Road was a trade route linking the east to west, along with traders could travel to sell their wares. It is called the Silk Road because it was first used to carry Chinese silk during the Chinese Han Dynasty. And also, if we look at some of the materials, did you know that European artists would paint images of important people like Mary, and they would put fake Arabic writing on the edges, because what that showed was that the clothes had a sign of wealth and refinement. So that is actually the Virgin Mary's gown in one of the paintings. Quilting is another one. Did you know that, first of all, quilting is sewing two pieces of cloth together with a layer in between, and it was brought back to Europe by the Crusaders. The Muslim armies did not wear armour, so they wore quilted shirts filled with straw. And the quilting became very popular in colder regions of Europe like Britain. And then maths. Who likes maths? Who hates maths? That is thanks to Muslims that we've got maths. Arabic numerals and the concept of zero, vital to the advancement of maths, was formulated by Muslim scholars and shared with medieval Europe. And these are the original numbers. Can you see how much they look like the original English numbers? We know that the numeral system and the concept of zero as well. There were two very important Muslim mathematicians, Al-Harazi and Al-Kindi, in 852 AD. They were the first to write a style of standard numerals, becoming the standard in use all over the world and later established in Europe by Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci. Al-Kindi discovered encryption, decoding number patterns, and frequent analysis, helping to decipher codes of ancient civilizations. And both of them formed theories still used today, like algorithms. Do you remember all those algorithm tables? And this one here, Al-Harazi, was born 800 AD. He introduced algebra. Did you know the word algebra comes from the word al-jabr? Al-jabr. He introduced the concept of using letters for unknown variables in equations in the 9th century. He solved complex equations, including quadratic and cubic equations. He used symbols to develop and perfect the binomial theorem. And algebra was named after his book, Al-Jabr wa al-Muqabala. Al-Jabr means equation. So this is why he was called or regarded as the father of algebra. So let's have a recap. We've looked at the joint work of Al-Kindi and Al-Harazi to form the standard number system and algorithms. Then we looked at Al-Kindi, who on his own discovered encryption and decoding. And then we looked at Al-Harazi, who himself introduced algebra and equations. So the next advancement is, from the algebra, is going to be geometry. And it was actually Tabot bin Heuchera who was the first to discover that algebra could be used to solve geometrical problems. And Abul Wafa wrote a 10th century book utilizing algebra to advance geometry into an exact simplified science. And that was actually a turning point in history, because before this, the mosques were very, very blandly decorated because of this concept of not being able to decorate mosques with idols or gods and prophets. Because Islam came basically to get rid of paganism and idol worship, so we would not decorate the mosques with these kinds of objects just in case people started worshipping the wrong god again, like what was happening before Islam came. So when geometry then was invented, all of a sudden all the mosques were very easily, elaborately decorated with geometrical patterns, especially in the dome region. I did talk a little bit about that earlier on. And there were also other inventions which were all, again, advancing previous inventions. So Muslims introduced negative numbers 400 years prior to Cardona. Obviously, we had the numbers 0 to 10 and then carrying on, but nobody went under the 0. So this is when negative numbers were introduced. And there was also, Muslims invented logarithms and produced logarithmic tables in the 13th century as well. And we've got another reference there at the bottom of the slide there, for some of you who want to look that up. And there's more. Calculus, quadrants, decimals, and fractions were used by Al-Harazi. He utilized decimals instead of fractions on a large scale. His book, Key to Arithmetic, was written in the 15th century and was the stimulus for the systematic application of decimals to whole numbers and fractions. This concept then very later on came to Europe by Stevin, who imported the idea to Europe from Al-Harazi's work. And that information is all referenced from the Science Museum. So I'm not making it all up. And then another part of maths is trigonometry. And trigonometry remained a theoretical science amongst Greeks until developed by Al-Battani. Now, some of you may remember that Al-Battani is the same gentleman who we talked about earlier on, who invented the astrolabe. A lot of inventors in those days specialized in so many regions, like Ibn Firnas, invented glasses, and then he tried to fly. So the inventors were actually specialized in a vast number of subjects. So Al-Battani, who is the one who invented the astrolabe, is the one who actually looked into trigonometry as well and developed it. And sine, cosine, and tangent, did you know, are all derived from Arabic terms. So those three words are actually Arabic words. And then once we've got sine, cosine, and tangent, it's obvious that the next invention is going to be linked with those, to do with circular objects, and the very first wheel was invented. And this is actually a picture of the very first wheel and its mechanism. And the wheel was actually a turning point in history again, because it involved inventing so many other things that involved wheels. So here are some of those other inventions. So you mostly see them on the playground, so bikes, tricycles, even the pivot system there of the seesaw that you can see. That is all actually derived from the mechanisms of a wheel. So, what I'm going to do now is to put on a video for you, and we're going to have a look at the top 10 inventions as a recap.
Muslim history is overflowing with awe-inspiring creations in the realms of art, architecture, and literature. But it's also filled with many significant and world-changing inventions. Here are 10 of them, as reported by CNN. Number 10, surgery. Dr. Al-Harazi literally wrote the book on surgery about 1,000 years ago. It was used throughout Europe for the next 500. He's also credited with inventing forceps and figuring out that cat guts made great dissolvable stitches. Number 9, coffee. The first pot was brewed in Yemen in the 9th century. In the early days, it helped Sufis stay awake for their late-night devotions. The beverage soon began to make the rounds in the area and finally ended up in Europe in the 16th century. Number 8, flying machine. Long before Leonardo da Vinci started dreaming of flight, Abbas bin Farnas was actually trying it. He built his first flying machine in the 9th century, and for a little while it worked. A very little while.
He covered his body in a bird costume, guided himself into the harness, and told the crowd, "By guiding these wings up and down, I should ascend like the birds."
Number 7, university. The world's very first degree-granting university was founded in Fez, Morocco in 859. It was established by Fatima Al-Firi, a young princess, nearly 1,200 years later, and it's still going strong. Number 6, algebra.
Whether you want to thank him or blame him, all the credit goes to Persian mathematician Al-Harazi. He penned the treatise that defined a new algebraic order in the 9th century. Number 5. Optics. Prior to the discoveries of Al-Haytham in the year 1000, it was widely believed that the eye itself emitted the light that makes sight possible. He set the record straight, proving that it takes in light that is bounced off other surfaces. Number 4. Music. Okay, not all music, but many from the Middle East contributed greatly to its development. The lute and the rahab, which influenced the creation of the violin, were both introduced to Europe by Muslim musicians. Also, the scale we use today is said to come from the Arabic alphabet. Number 3. Toothbrush. Thankfully, around the year 600, the Prophet Muhammad reportedly had the good sense to fashion one out of a twig. The tree it came from also had breath-freshening qualities. Number 2. The crank. The first known instance of converting rotary movement to a linear one occurred in the Middle East in the 12th century. Since then, the method has been used worldwide for lifting heavy objects, driving internal combustion engines, and creating bicycles. Number 1. Hospitals. The earliest known versions of them began to pop up in Muslim world late in the 9th century. They had centers for teaching as well as patient wards.
Okay, so that was a very, very good recap there of some of the inventions. Obviously, like I explained to you earlier, there is actually over 1001 inventions in the book that I showed you earlier, which is also referenced on my slides, is an excellent book really to have a look at, because it depicts a lot more than what I've spoken to you about. One of the inventions which I didn't mention before was just documented now on that video, and that was the invention of musical notes and also bringing in the violin into Europe, and that was a Muslim person. So that's very, very interesting. We will move on. Okay, and we know that while all this was going on, it was actually the Dark Ages in England and in the whole of Europe. Even though it was the Dark Ages in Europe, it was the golden age within the Islamic world. So great big contrast there. And it was the light really from that Islamic world that lit up the darkness within Europe. So it's an absolutely substantial really part of history within Europe as well as within Islam. And all good things have to come to an end. And this is the saddest part of the talk today. It was actually in 1258 AD that there was an early Islamic civilization invasion. And the Mongols from Asia attacked Islamic lands, and during the attack they destroyed the House of Wisdom, they burnt Baghdad, and they killed thousands of people. They threw millions of books into the river, which turned the water black with ink. The city never recovered its former glory, but the ideas, they still live on today. So that's all the lovely memories that we can hold on to. That brings me to the end of the talk. And I just wanted to ask if there were any questions in the audience. No? Well, do you know what? I think you all look really surprised. So you're probably, gobsmacked. You haven't got any, probably in shock stage. But what we'll do is we'll go outside and we'll have some lunch. Please do stay for lunch. We've got a lovely big buffet out there. And if you've got any questions, then you can ask me them outside, and I'll be there for at least an hour, so we can all network and we can ask questions. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming. We've had a great turnout, and I will keep you updated on future talks at the university. Thank you very much.